team of 601 starters braved chilly winds and a steady drizzle in the 71st Boston Marathon.
The 1967 Boston Marathon was run in some of the worst conditions in race history. While most of the crowd was focused on the front of the pack, another runner was making a stir far behind.
The idea of running long distance was always considered very questionable for women because, you know, an arduous activity would mean that you're going to get big legs and grow a mustache and hair on your chest and your uterus was going to fall out.
In 1967, Catherine Switzer was a junior at Syracuse University. Because Syracuse had no women's track team, she began training with the manager of the men's team, a part-time mailman named Arnie Briggs.
It was Arnie who told me about the greatest day in his life every year, which was the Boston Marathon. And we were out running, and Arnie began telling me another Boston Marathon story. And I said, oh, Arnie, let's just quit talking about the darn marathon and run it. And my dream then became to prove that I could run 26 miles, 385 yards.
For 70 years, the Boston Marathon had excluded women. But Switzer entered using just her initials.
We walked to the start, and the gun went off, and down the street we went. So there we were, Arnie Briggs, the 50-year-old mailman, and me, the 20-year-old college student, and my boyfriend, Tom Miller, an ex-All-American football player. When other runners would come by, they would say, oh, it's a girl! And they were so excited. And all of a sudden, the press truck is in front of us, and they're taking, pictures of us. On this truck was the race director, a feisty guy by the name of Jock Semple. He just stopped the bus, jumped off, and ran after me. And he just grabbed me and screamed at me, get the hell out of my race and give me those numbers. He had the fiercest face of any guy I'd ever seen. And all of a sudden, Big Tom, my boyfriend, came with a streak and gave Jock the most incredible crossbody block and sent Jock flying right through the air and landed on the curb. And all of this happened in front of the press truck. Journalists got very aggressive. What are you trying to prove? Are you a suffragette? Are you a crusader? Whatever that is, And I said, what? I'm just trying to run. Then it got very quiet. Snow's coming down. Nobody's saying anything. And I turned to Arnie and I said, Arnie, I'm going to finish this race on my hands and my knees if I have to. If I don't finish this race, then everybody's going to believe women can't do it. I've got to finish this race. I finished that race in 4 hours, 20 minutes. It wasn't until we stopped on the thruway to get an ice cream and some coffee that we see the newspapers and the coverage front and back of all the different editions with pictures. I realized that now this was very, very important, and this was going to change my life, and it was probably going to change women's sports. There is an expression in a marathon that you do go through sort of a lifetime of experience. And I often say that I started the Boston Marathon as a girl, and I finished the Boston Marathon as a grown woman.
For the high school graduates of the 1950s, life looked good. America was booming, creating a prosperous new middle class. For boys, the future held almost limitless possibilities. But society did not see as much promise for girls.
You go to college, you get a degree in education in case, God forbid, you ever have to go to work. And while you're there, you damn well better meet the man you're going to marry, because otherwise, where else are you going to meet him? All the women I know married before we were out of college. We didn't have a chance to grow up. We didn't have a chance to find out what we might have been able to do.
There were an awful lot who thought you should get your MRS degree, and then you were going to be taken care of. It was like you were carried away on this wonderful barge, and life was good from then on.
As each girl got engaged in my class, they would raise their hands like this so that you could see the diamond. That's what it was about. The ring, the silver pattern, the china.
For middle-class American women, the ideal was to get married and then to cheerfully assume their proper place in the home as wives and mothers.
I wish. I just wish I had a decent kitchen.
I turned 20 in 1952. There was very heavy propaganda everywhere to live the good life, which meant in a small house with your children and your husband, preferably in the suburbs, and that was it.
Everywhere, it seemed, the culture was reinforcing the image of the happy homemaker.
You were supposed to be always perky and pretty and cheerful, never to have moods, and never to be serious either. I don't remember any actual serious, smart woman in television or in advertising in those years.
Wife, I said, pay attention, because I'm going to teach you how to make coffee.
It wasn't always so for American women.
The girl I left behind has the job I left behind.
During World War II, many women were working in factories, building the tanks and airplanes vital to the war effort.
In the United States today, no large business office or store could even hope to function efficiently without women.
By the early 1950s, female workers had swapped tanks and airplanes for typewriters and mimeograph machines. Though the number of women in the workplace gradually increased throughout the decade, their jobs were almost always low-paying and dead-end.
When I first got out of college and applied for jobs, there were pink cards in the employment agencies for women to fill out and blue cards for men to fill out. If you opened the New York Times, you saw help wanted men, help wanted women. And you could not apply for a job in the men's column because you wouldn't get through the door. There was absolutely no way of crossing that barrier.
Your high score on the Scholastic Aptitude Test indicates that you can become a good secretary.
As dismal as were the jobs held by most white women, they were high-paid careers next to those available to African Americans.
I had one goal, and that was if only I could one day work in an office, because every woman that I knew was doing housework. By that I mean they were maids.
Even those women advantaged by the best educations had almost no shot at a high-paying professional job.
At the law school, there was a bulletin board, and it had notices on it from many law firms. Stanford law graduates, give us a call. I called every phone number on the bulletin board. They said, oh, well, we didn't mean women. We don't hire women.
Even if they held jobs for a time, most middle-class women eventually became homemakers. Tucked behind white picket fences, they were supposed to be settled and happy. Some were, but more and more felt like something was missing.
Here they were, they had better lives than their mothers or their grandmothers. They were living in better homes. And they were thinking to themselves, I ought to be the happiest person in the world, but they weren't.
I lived on a cul-de-sac in suburban New Jersey, maybe 30 houses, and there wasn't one woman in any of those houses who worked. And when I started to do this, when I wanted to write, they laughed at me. They laughed at me. What makes you think you can do this?
There was something wrong with you if you weren't happy. You weren't normal somehow. You weren't doing what you were supposed to do as a wife and a mother. And if you had 4 beautiful children like I did, how could you possibly complain about your life? I felt inside very alienated from the world. I felt there was something horrifically wrong with me, that I would want anything other than what I had.
A year ago, this woman heaved a brick through the rose-colored picture window of the American suburban bungalow and invited the resident housewife to take a clear look at the outside world. This book has sold more than 50,000 copies in the hardcover edition, and 700,000 have been published in paperback.
In 1963, a writer named Betty Friedan published The Feminine Mystique, her scathing expose of the happy homemaker myth.
The feminine mystique has made us feel it's unfeminine to use our rights, to really want equality, to want to take part in the decisions of the world in politics. Career woman almost became a dirty word.
Betty Friedan had given up the chance for an academic career to become a homemaker and part-time journalist in the 1950s. Feeling there was something missing in her own life, she wondered if other women felt the same way.
She decided to interview her old classmates at Smith prior to a reunion. In doing that, she surfaced a deep sense of malaise among women who had very fine educations and then felt that they really didn't have choices, that there were no avenues for their talents, and were caught in some profound way.
A woman today has been made to feel freakish and alone and guilty if simply she wants to be more than her husband's wife, her children's mother. If she really wants to use her abilities in society. And
everybody read The Feminine Mystique. And of course, we all had mothers who suffered from the problem that has no name. They didn't know what was wrong. Why were they not satisfied by the 3 children and the perfect house?
Up until that time, I was thinking that I was just different. A lot of my girlfriends were getting married straight out of college, and I was thinking, I don't want to do that at all. But reading that book let me know that there were masses of women who felt differently, and that it was stunning.
But to the women content with their traditional roles, the feminine mystique felt like a slap in the face.
I first read The Feminine Mystique in the winter of 1964. I felt personally judged. All these things that women at home can do, which are extremely worthwhile to society, were dismissed as dilettantism and unworthy of any respect.
However it was received, Betty Friedan's book was certainly timely, as women's rights was beginning to surface as a national issue. In 1963, President Kennedy issued a report finding widespread discrimination against women in the workplace.
It was an historic occasion, the passage of the Civil Rights Bill.
The next year, President Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act. Title VII of the Act barred unequal treatment on the basis of race or religion. In a surprise, last-minute move, Congress included a ban on gender discrimination as well.